I was a patsy that came along and she took advantage of me.
I was shell-shocked. Like, oh my God, I got to pay this forever and ever. This is crazy.
Because I chose to do the right thing at the time, and it didn't work out like most teenage high school marriages don't. Now I'm sentenced with a lifetime requirement.
I was honestly losing my mind. I was losing control of my composure.
These people are talking about something they never knew about and couldn't imagine the day they took their wedding vows. The fact that their marriage would end up in divorce court until death do us part would extend beyond their failed marriage, as they'd be ordered to pay alimony forever. It doesn't end at retirement or a serious illness, but it ends upon death.
And little did I know that this thing called alimony, let alone lifetime alimony, was something that I'd be inflicted with. And I use the word inflicted very liberally because it's nothing that we voluntarily have signed up for.
Natalie Willis, a South Florida OBGYN who put herself through med school, had never heard of lifetime alimony until she got divorced, and the court ordered her to pay her ex-husband $10,000 a month for the rest of her life. It sent Willis into deep depression.
Things sort of deteriorated. I couldn't pay my alimony. I couldn't pay my own. I had bought another house at the time. I couldn't pay my mortgage. Ended up losing the house, lost my car, lost my business. There was a time I could not put gas in my car. And all I worried about every month was, how am I going to pay my alimony?
Willis isn't alone. Depression and anxiety are very common among permanent alimony payers because they see no end in sight. Worrying about paying alimony is a major concern for the spouse saddled with the obligation. That's particularly true for Willis because she's on her third pacemaker in a profession that requires around-the-clock shifts.
Trophy wife.
Meantime, the stereotype of a high-rolling husband trading in his wife for a much younger trophy wife just doesn't hold water. According to a 2015 Bureau of Labor Statistics study, in 38% of heterosexual marriages, the woman is the higher wage earner, and that's expected to grow.
Honestly, I felt like a caged animal, like I had no way out.
Tanya Williams is another example of a woman paying alimony to her ex-husband. Williams says she had to seek a divorce because, as she testified to the Florida Senate Judiciary Committee in 2013, her bipolar former spouse was abusive to her as well as her children. Williams, who says she feared her abusive spouse, also says when she got the courage to file for divorce, she thought her life would get back on track.
I can tell you how elated and how incredibly free I felt at that moment. Did not last for long. He subsequently found an attorney, very aggressive attorney, maybe the most aggressive attorney in Fort Myers. I'm not sure, but I certainly felt that way. And what I found going through the system is they treat you like a criminal.
And now Williams, a dentist, is paying her ex-spouse and her abuser alimony for the rest of her life.
But I was holding out hope. When the judge hears my story, when the judge sees what's going on, I will get some relief, and there will be some like, okay, Tanya, you're free. You've done your best. This was my wish. You've done your best. You tried to hold it together. God bless you. Go your way and have your life, have your peace. No, that did not happen. I got the final judgment, and the judge determined that he was the non-working spouse. I was the working spouse. Therefore, he gets permanent alimony of $3,500 a month for the rest of his life. He gets to retire early. Good luck with that. Retire early, no accountability, no responsibility. I don't get to retire at all because I now have to pay him before I pay any of my bills. $3,500 a month, that's just going to happen no matter what else happens.
It's crippling, I think, and the reality of the fact that my mom has been going through this for almost 30 years.
Williams' daughter Amber is concerned she will have to support her mother, whom she says will never be able to retire because of the lifetime order to pay alimony to the man she testified abused her.
And the fact that she's still supporting him is just mind-blowing to me, and it feels like it's more than ironic. It's like, okay, my mom is still in an abusive situation.
It's too devastating to even imagine I'll never be able to retire. How can I pay $3,500 a month to someone when I'm retired, getting Social Security, and still support myself? I mean, I can't wrap my head around that. And sometimes I think, am I going to be homeless? I'm going to have to rely on my children. And that's just not fair.
Most other states don't think it's fair either, as very few still have permanent alimony. As a matter of fact, in the past 7 years, blue states like Massachusetts and New Hampshire have abolished lifetime alimony and made durational alimony the norm. Those reforms debunk the partisan divide that's taken hold in Florida, where many Democrats have voted against reform. Meantime, many people often confuse alimony and child support. Alimony can be awarded even in childless marriages or to ex-spouses who have older or adult children, meaning the alimony supports just one person, the ex-spouse.
And there's just no justification for permanent alimony.
Family law attorney Jim Kramer argues permanent alimony is unconstitutional and violates the 13th Amendment, which prohibits indentured servitude.
And it is where you're basically being forced to work for the benefit of another under threat of jail. That's not allowed. That is an involuntary servitude. Well, alimony is the same thing. You are being forced to work for the benefit of your ex-wife or husband. And if you don't work or you don't pay, the courts will throw you in jail. The threat is they will sanction you for that contempt by throwing you in jail.
And the threat of arrest isn't just an idle threat.
It was unbelievable. It was like you were living in a nightmare that when these two police officers showed up.
Registered nurse Lisa Marie Courtney knows firsthand. Police arrested her physician husband at their medical office when he was late with a payment. However, both his attorney and his ex-wife's attorney neglected to tell the court that Courtney had corrected the problem and had made the full payment before officers showed up.
Both of them thought that it was okay that my husband be arrested at his place where, you know, humiliation and this unbelievable question and black cloud hanging over your head that this is what it's come down to. You know, does this woman not realize that if he goes to jail, then that $5,800 will never be met, and that it will never be the same no matter, you know, how you look at it? You are the one that is impeding your payment.
Courtney says permanent alimony is unfair to her family and to teenage children who have been traumatized by seeing their father hauled off to jail. She says the $5,800 a month means her family can't afford health insurance. She and her husband never took a honeymoon, and she couldn't afford to fly home to Canada when her father died. Although Florida divorce law says the award of alimony may not leave the payer with significantly less net income than the net income of the recipient, and both parties are supposed to maintain their previous lifestyles, it just doesn't work that way.
It's a fallacy because obviously the payer can never live a lifestyle like they've lived prior to the divorce, because he is now supporting two families, especially if they have moved on. If they didn't, you know, you got two households, you got two homes, two cars, two of everything. His lifestyle has changed. Hers has gotten better. She has never had $5,800 a month at her leisure to do what she likes, so therefore she is able to buy and pay for the trips to Paris, to England, to go home and take the two girls and her boyfriend over to England to, you know, have a leisurely vacation, which we I think the furthest we've been in the last 8 years is Orlando for a vacation.
The Florida law doesn't hold a lifetime alimony recipient accountable for ever becoming self-sufficient, whether they're currently working or worked in the past. Additionally, no rehabilitation plan is required. So far, Lisa Marie's husband has paid out $1 million in alimony to a person who is trained as a registered nurse. Traditionally, Florida courts have assumed physicians can pay permanent alimony even if they no longer work. Michael Morgan is a prime example. Morgan's Alzheimer's forced him to close down his practice in 2007. This video is from 2011. He finally died this past summer in 2018. But when Michael Morgan went to court to seek a modification of the alimony, the judge refused to lower it.
It's a lifetime sentence, and you would have thought that the judge would have said, you know, when you get to where you can't take care of yourself, and you know with Alzheimer's, it happens. We will lower it or, end it, something. And they even should end it if they retire, You can't retire if you have lifetime alimony because you have to continue paying that amount. I just don't understand why they don't get it. It's like, it's okay. So what if he can't get up and work or he can't do anything for himself? It doesn't make any difference. You have to pay this person, the rest of your life.
Linda Morgan, who has an amazingly positive attitude, does find it ironic that her husband paid for his ex-wife to get a bachelor and master's degree, meaning she was much more capable of earning a living than he was because of the Alzheimer's. But the judge didn't see it that way.
We had to pay her attorney's fees, our attorney's fees. That was over $100,000. And then the judge also made him put back $250,000 for her to get when he passed away. Just think they need to change the alimony. Get them on their feet, but don't give them lifetime alimony and have them sit around and do nothing. That's not good for them. They need to be able to take care of themselves.
But even ex-spouses who don't sit around and do nothing and can easily take care of themselves because they're earning a decent income are able to take advantage of Florida's permanent alimony law.
I'm not paying to support her, I'm just paying alimony because I was ordered, but she doesn't need support.
Meet Jose Alemán, a cardiologist who's under court order to pay his ex-wife $50,000 a year for the rest of his life, despite the fact she's a dentist, and Alemán says his ex-wife has a six-figure income.
But the court forces you by jail time to pay alimony and keep the standard of living of the lower income spouse. No matter how is your standard of living, I think that's not right. Makes no sense.
And like so many others sentenced to lifetime alimony, Alemán says he's resigned to the fact he'll work the rest of his life.
So I don't see myself retirement. I'm mentally prepared not to retire unless there is a drastic change in the law. I'll probably, either be demented, writing prescriptions on the desk and they'll kick me out, or I'll just drop dead.
And Alemán echoes the thoughts of many paying lifetime alimony who blame the family section of the Florida bar. The group hired a lobbyist to convince Governor Rick Scott to veto an alimony reform bill that passed in 2013 and 2016 in the legislature with an overwhelming majority vote. Attorney Jim Kramer says it's not surprising.
If you want to rack up a bunch of attorney's fees, you just keep litigating the alimony issue. The guy, and the more money the primary breadwinner has, typically a male, let's just use a doctor for example, the more incentive the wife's attorney has to over-litigate it. Both attorneys are getting paid through this. Problem is, the wife doesn't have any risk because under the attorney's fee statute, the judge is typically going to order the husband to pay some or all of her attorney's fees. So she's got no skin in the game.
Right now, the law facilitates excess litigation. It's based on a need and ability to pay. But unlike child support, alimony is not calculated by a formula to make it easy for people to agree and stop fighting. Worse, the vague laws result in varying outcomes from courtroom to courtroom. Without a formula to calculate alimony, lawyers sometimes convince their clients to over-litigate to maximize the alimony. And some say the threat of litigation and not knowing how a judge will rule can create a weapon of control, revenge, or extortion.
It seems unfair.
Steve Schaefer knows firsthand. We caught up with Schaefer before he had his final divorce hearing, but at that point he had spent $160,000 in attorney and forensic accounting fees to try to determine a value for his pool business. What's worse is that Schaefer and his wife had hammered out an agreement before the money had been spent, but her attorney advised her not to sign it, but instead to litigate for more.
And I think after working for 30 years, I deserve the opportunity to slow down without having to spend another $160,000 to modify, because anyone that tells you, don't worry about it, it's an easy process. Depositions are not cheap, mediation is not cheap, forensic accountants are not cheap. The whole process is ridiculous, and nobody's thinking about the 57-year-old with the 10-year-old kid. That money's wasted forever.
Schaefer is upset that because Florida is a no-fault divorce state, judges rarely consider adultery in awarding alimony and often ignore the lower-earning spouse's ability to earn a living without the alimony award. Other people assume that if a person is paying alimony, it's because they did something wrong in their marriage and therefore deserve it. In Florida, sometimes the person paying alimony is not the person who committed adultery. The payer is simply the person who is earning more money.
First of all, it should matter who cheated, who destroyed the relationship. Because remember, when this happened, I tried to save the marriage, right? I was trying to, keep our family together. So I think that should be a factor that the judge should consider. And she's a registered nurse. I think everybody knows a registered nurse can stand on their own 2 feet.
I was very depressed. I watched everything that I had built pretty much crumble. I had the rug pulled out from underneath me. I was blindsided by this.
Lee Callett had a similar experience with his ex-wife cheating. Callett says she was having an affair and had fallen in love with a woman, but because Callett made much more money than his ex-wife, he received a lifetime sentence.
She is the one that cheated on you.
Yes. But again, because the way the law is in the state of Florida, it only becomes a factor if one party can show that the other dissipated significant marital funds on an extramarital affair.
Even though his ex-wife was the one who had the affair, Callett, who had an executive sales job, was ordered to pay $4,000 a month in alimony. But then when he was in his 60s, Callett lost his job.
I suddenly found myself without work. And let me tell you, trying to find work when you're 60 plus years old is not easy, even when you have, a great career track record to point back to.
Callett sought a modification in the alimony, but his ex-wife's attorney convinced a judge that he wasn't allowed the modification, even though his ex-wife had earned a master's degree and had the potential to make more money than he could. After spending thousands and thousands of dollars that tapped out Callett's savings, an appeals court said the judge was wrong and sent it back to her, but to date she's not granted Callett's motion, and he's broke because of a system that he says is broken.
Lifetime alimony should never be awarded to anybody. The idea that anybody could ever be forced to pay another able-bodied human being for the rest of their life just because they made a bad choice when they got married, or the other party cheated on them, and if I told anybody that I stopped on the street and told them my story, you think anybody would say, oh God, you should have stayed married to her? Of course not.
In the case of Lee Callett, the ex-wife sent an email threatening his current wife's assets, making her afraid enough to file for divorce. It's actually not uncommon for a judge to look at family income as a source to pay the first spouse.
And in many respects, I got married a second time. My second divorce is directly attributable to the demise of my first marriage. It's just a very sad thing, but people who get married a second time come with a lot of baggage, some more baggage than others, all right? And if you're still tied up in costly litigation with your previous spouse, that puts a lot of strain on a marriage. It does. It was a tough thing.
Many pushing for alimony reform in Florida blame the National Organization for Women for putting up a roadblock. Natalie Willis finds that ironic because she says now paved the way for so many women like her to be able to go to med school and crack the glass ceiling. But on this issue, Willis, who was ordered to pay lifetime alimony to her ex-husband, says now portrays women as helpless and non-employable. She also feels that now doesn't represent all women, especially accomplished women like her.
So National Organization, in its agenda, has chosen to support lifetime alimony. In doing so, they've waived the women's vote in front of the legislators. So they say, if you want the women's vote, you're not going to allow reform movement to be successful. So it's been a big obstacle. They're our biggest obstacle.
Now lobbyist Barbara Devane, who declined our offer for an on-camera interview, has testified to the legislature several times, and she told us everyone, and she did say everyone, who testified in favor of alimony reform lied to the legislature. Devane adds any move to modify lifetime alimony in Florida is anti-woman. Meantime, Devane seems to contradict herself. In her 2015 Senate Appropriations Committee testimony, the four-time divorcee states, "No, I have never asked for alimony because I'm one of those smart women who did not give up my career." She continued later in her testimony to say, "All my ex-husbands should be very grateful."
It's just not fair, not in today's day and age of equal opportunities for everyone, not with online schools, online colleges, and everyone has the ability to increase their situation.
Dennis Parent, who is an Army helicopter pilot, says his 12-year marriage fell apart during his several deployments to Iraq. And Parent says if he lives a long life, he could be paying alimony 4 times longer than he was married. And it irks him that his ex-wife is living a better life than he is.
My ex-wife consistently posts photos on social media about, her new tattoos and vacations. She's taken more vacations in the last, 6 years than I have.
Meantime, lifetime alimony pushes some beyond wanting to live. Petra Howe's fiancé, Daniel Inman, was forced to eat in a soup kitchen, and he's so depressed he can't talk about it on camera.
And being suicidal because he didn't know how to live anymore. He was very depressed. He still fights depression. He fights anxiety. Still, he is on the edge when I talk about her.
But under state law, Inman should no longer be paying alimony because his ex-wife remarried. But unbelievably, the judge refused to vacate the order, and Inman doesn't have enough money to file an appeal.
Once a financial affidavit is done, and once it's proved there is resources, and once it's proved that the person is remarried, the other party should not be obligated to go ahead and continue supporting that partner because it's not their duty anymore.
The current laws were enacted during a time when single-family incomes were common. Women infrequently worked, and women routinely didn't pursue higher education or professional careers. Today, the outdated laws don't reflect the reality that women represent more than half of college attendees and more than 30% out-earn their male spouses. Today, the antiquated laws result in unintended or unforeseen consequences that negatively impact the payer, materially affect families, and create an unending animosity. But these abuses that include a woman paying alimony to a man who abused her, a physician who not only could not work but also couldn't think or take care of himself, and spouses who were victims of cheating spouses will continue until the law is changed. And the only hope is the legislature and the new governor.
As I said, I never would have expected that this was going to be my life. And to this day, I have a hard time believing that this is how my life has turned out, because everything that's happened since then has been a direct result of that.
He has no skin in the game. What's his incentive to work? What is his incentive? There is none.
I would say this is just so unfair. Whether or not my ex-husband was abusive or not, this is just wrong.